At times in the past, I've wondered if I truly mattered because I wasn't famous, and it was difficult for me to look at people who were famous and see the amount of respect and attention they were getting and think that I could come anywhere close to measuring up to that. And I'm sure I'm not the only person that's felt that way. But then I thought about it more and I realized that there are actually a few downsides to fame that might not be so obvious that are worth noting, because your chances of becoming famous are infinitesimally small. But not only that, it's also not very pleasant to think to yourself that you don't matter. And you might pursue that and possibly even achieve it and then realize that it's not the magical solution to all your problems and it doesn't make you happy. So I'm going to go through just a few of those downsides so that hopefully we can improve our perspectives on fame. So the first and probably most obvious downside of fame is the very high degree of scrutiny that you're going to be subject to by the public. So yes, people are going to be praising you for all the great things that you do, but at the same time, they're also going to be condemning you for even the most seemingly insignificant and trivial bad things that you do. So you could do something as simple as go out to the grocery store and bump into somebody, and then everybody's going to know about it, and the next day the headlines are going to read that so-and-so is one of the rudest celebrities out there. And worse yet, they're not going to forget about it, and it's not just going to blow over. Somebody's going to bring it up in 5 years and be like, are you going to apologize for what you did to that guy 5 years ago? So there's so much more that you can get away with, and there's so much more freedom that you have when you're under the cloak of anonymity than when you're in the public eye. If you bump into somebody at the grocery store, regardless of how upset it makes you or the other person, eventually it's going to blow over and it's going to cease to matter. Now, another downside of fame that might not be so obvious is the immense amount of hard work and years of dedication that it takes to achieve fame. And that's not so obvious because it's not really advertised and we don't really see it. We just kind of see the end result of celebrities enjoying their fame and looking really happy and getting all the attention. But the reality is it does take that much effort. And rightfully so, because fame is a great privilege that can't be just given and has to be earned. It's kind of a reward in a way that we as society give to those people for having worked so much harder than the rest of us. But so that means, however, that you're going to have to be very, very passionate about whatever it is that you're doing and get some kind of intrinsic joy out of it. Because if you don't, then you're going to spend a very long time just being miserable, and you're possibly not even going to achieve fame as a result of that. And even if you do, you still have to keep putting stuff out there in order to stay relevant and continue to maintain your fame. So for example, you could achieve a modest level of fame by being a special operator in the military, Navy SEAL, Army Delta, Ranger, Marine Scout Sniper, something like that. But there's a reason why those titles are so esteemable, and that's because they're extremely difficult to have to attain. So if you want the recognition that comes with that, then you have to ask yourself if you're ready to commit yourself to what essentially is a lifetime of pain and misery. Because if you're not, then you're not going to make it. And I know in my case, I was not anywhere near a special operator by any means, but even accomplishing what little I did in the military, the prospect of getting famous off of that was not worth the amount of suffering that I had to go through. So if you came up to me on any one of those cold, miserable, sleepless nights in the field and offered me two options, one of which was to do an interview to possibly get famous off of what I was doing, or the other option as an alternative was to take a warm shower in that moment, I would have picked the latter in a heartbeat. Now, the next downside is what I like to refer to as fake admiration, where people aren't admiring you for who you really are, which is what I'd argue we all really want, is to be recognized for being hard workers, being selfless and ambitious and all those things. But really, people are admiring who they think you are, which is not who you really are under the surface. Your exaggerated version of yourself, the image that you're trying to sell. And that can be very disappointing if someone's swooning over you, but you know that it's not because of who you really are, but it's instead because they think you're somebody else. So, for example, we tend to put movie stars up on a pedestal, but that's not because people actually admire who they really are as people. Instead, it's because they admire how they see them portrayed in the movies, which is oftentimes as this courageous and valiant hero that seamlessly just saves the day all the time. But in reality, we didn't see the amount of camera magic that it took to achieve that, and we're only seeing the 50th take where they finally got it right, but we didn't see the first 49 takes in which they probably messed up. And it can also be very intimidating because the expectations are now set very high. And at the end of the day, everybody's just an ordinary person. No one is superhuman. So when you're meeting somebody for the first time and they start to get to know you, they might very well be disappointed once they realize that you're not this great deified image of who they thought you were. Next, you have to keep in mind that there's no such thing as universal fame where everybody just loves you. No matter how famous you are, some people are always going to hate you. And I think politicians are a great example of this, but also Bill Gates once had a pie thrown at him. Somebody once threw an egg at Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was the governor. So you just have to ask yourself if you're ready for people to really hate you on a fundamental level, even though they don't really even know who you are. And again, that's something you don't have to deal with if you're not famous. And the last item on the list, at least that I can think of, is that you're going to have to constantly question the authenticity of your relationships when you're famous. Because you have a lot to offer, and people are going to gravitate towards you in much higher numbers than they did if you were to not be famous. And that might seem great on the surface, but really you can't be certain that people are doing that because they don't have an agenda. Not because they want to become famous by association, or they want your money, or they want a connection or something like that, rather than them actually caring about who you are and wanting to genuinely be your friend, which is a concern that's going to be mitigated to a degree if you were to not be famous. And you can also imagine it would be stressful to have to worry about losing relationships over time that you thought were strong once people start to think that you no longer are of any use to them. Once you start to lose a little bit of your fame or your money, or something bad happens that's publicized or something like that. Now, I fully acknowledge that there are many upsides to being famous, namely the fact that people listen to you and you're kind of immortalized to a degree, and you're certainly going to be very financially well off. So I'm not saying don't pursue that. Instead, I'm saying that before you do, just ask yourself what you really want and think that through and everything that that entails and what you need to do to achieve that. And for me, it's to actually have a meaningful and positive impact on people's lives through the experiences that I've had in my own life, so that they recognize me for who I really am, and so that I make a difference and I matter in the way that I want to. And the way for me to achieve that is by, for one, making the YouTube videos that I do and putting those lessons out there, but also putting the work into forging meaningful relationships with people, getting to know who they really are and having them do the same for me. And so that means that I'm not going to achieve the same level of fame that some people do, but I think that trade-off is worth it. So I hope you guys like the video. Let me know if that helps, and I'll see you next time.